Hi, I'm Dr. Larry Malerba. Welcome back to the ATH Materia Medica series. A great deal can be said about today's remedy, Lachesis, so I've had to work hard to distill it down to its most important features. Lachesis is a remedy made from the venom of the bushmaster snake. One of the great stories in homeopathic history describes how Dr. Constantine Herring, considered by many to be the father of American homeopathy, extracted the venom from this South American snake and developed it into our most broadly indicated and well understood snake remedies. In 1830, Dr. Herring donated his entire biological and botanical collection to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, where his original Lachesis specimen still resides to this day, pickled in a jar of alcohol. So without further ado, let's talk about Lachesis.
All right, let's begin with the Lachesis mentals. The mind of Lachesis is quick and fluid, lively and perceptive, capable of juggling and sizing up multiple perceptions all at the same time. The rapidity of his mind is matched by an intuitive ability to absorb all of the impressions that greet him as he enters into the consulting room. He takes it all in and processes it quickly and nimbly. He is intense and passionate and a jack of all trades, with interests that span a wide range of topics. His strong intuition and quick mind may predispose him to explore a wide variety of esoteric interests or spiritual traditions. He may even possess psychic or clairvoyant abilities. By the way, I found Lachesis to be an extremely useful remedy for both men and women. So when I refer to it as he or she or they, that's only for the sake of ease and convenience. Lachesis' dexterity of mind usually corresponds to a verbal ability to express ideas rapidly and accurately. In fact, Lachesis is famous for its extreme talkativeness and rapid speech. However, depending upon the particular case, the speech pattern and ideas expressed can run the entire spectrum from urgent, accurate, and on target to hurried and wandering to irrational and incoherent. This great need to express himself is often connected to or proportional to the degree to which he is in denial about some aspect of his emotional life. This often takes the form of unacknowledged or unexpressed grief, hurt, or anger. The same mind that so easily perceives the faults and weaknesses of those around him has a distinct tendency to minimize his own personal issues. This strong denial mechanism leads to a type of mental emotional imbalance whereby the energy backlog created by unprocessed emotion is instead rechanneled into mental activity. Simply put, instead of feeling his emotions, he begins to think faster and talk more. This tendency to deny is often accompanied by extreme touchiness, especially when, during an interview, the practitioner hits upon a particularly sensitive subject. There's a hidden hostility lurking just under the surface of the person who needs this remedy. One gets the feeling that he must bite his tongue so as not to lose his temper. The Lachesis patient has an edge, one that can make others feel uncomfortable. It can sometimes cause the practitioner to feel like he or she must walk on eggshells, being careful not to provoke the ire of the patient. When provoked, Lachesis can lash out, oftentimes in a critical or sarcastic manner. Lachesis is famous for its sarcasm. His sarcastic wit is often pointed and barbed. Think of it as thinly veiled hostility disguised as humor. He tries to hold his anger back, but it can build to the point where it eventually explodes. When losing control, he can become harsh, aggressive, fault-finding, and even mocking. His intuitive ability to size people up enables him to land his criticism at their weakest spots, where they are most vulnerable. It's easy to see why one would feel cautious and even guarded around such persons. Now, it's a well understood dynamic of the human psyche that when one fails to acknowledge one's own feelings, there's a tendency to project those feelings onto others. So when Lachesis denies her woundedness and represses her anger, she turns it outward. We think of Lachesis when a patient liberally uses the word hate in general conversation. She may say that she hates milk, or that she hates that TV show, or that political party. She becomes mistrustful of the motives of those around her, fearing that they have hostile intentions towards her. Instead of owning her feelings, she turns the tables and accuses others of the very things that she is unwilling to admit about herself. She denies her anger and is critical, but believes others feel similarly toward her. She acts suspicious and untrusting, but thinks she perceives the same mistrust in others. This inability to admit how one really feels can lead to adversarial relationships. The effect of this denial is to paint a picture of a world that tends to be rather black and white. Political extremism can be one consequence of such a black and white perspective. She believes herself to be in the right while others are wrong. She thinks, I'm not to blame, you are. I didn't criticize you, you criticized me. When she can no longer contain herself, her anger and suspicion can turn to vengefulness. Lachesis has a distinct tendency to abruptly terminate relationships. Instead of dealing with her own issues, she feels hatred towards those who have offended her. She gets her revenge by cutting them out of her life. She wants nothing to do with them. Now, most Lachesis patients will admit to having trust issues. They may say that they don't trust anybody. They're often critical of conventional medicine and may announce that they don't like taking drugs or that they don't trust allopathic doctors. They may demonstrate this mistrust even when it comes time to take a homeopathic remedy. The patient hesitates, acting concerned about what it is, and may continue to ask questions until he's reassured that the remedy is safe to take. Sometimes he even refuses to take it. I like to think of Laches's lack of trust on a spectrum, ranging from simple mistrust to more overt suspiciousness to frank paranoia. At its worst, it can manifest as an actual fear of being poisoned. All of this turns out to make a great deal of sense when we find out that the remedy Lachesis is known primarily for its loquacity and jealousy. His inability to own his true feelings is rechanneled into a brainstorm of ideas that he can barely contain. His thoughts come pouring out into a torrent of speech, and his emotions are projected onto others, making him mistrustful of others. And when it comes to personal relationships, jealousy is one of the most common human expressions of mistrust. As a consequence, Lachesis tends to be controlling in relationships. He is jealous and possessive, oftentimes without cause. Sometimes his jealousy can spill over into envy over others and their possessions or accomplishments, but it tends to show itself more often as jealousy in romantic relationships. Another prominent feature of Lachesis is his inability to tolerate any kind of emotional, physical, psychological, or even situational constraints. He resents authority or anything that he perceives as an attempt to control him. He even has an aversion to any clothing that he feels to be too constricting. This feeling applies especially to the neck. He hates tight collars or jewelry close to his neck, and he can't stand anyone putting their hands near his neck. When we understand Lachesis, we realize that this aversion to being controlled, constricted, or restricted is just an extension of the basic underlying feeling of mistrust regarding the world around him. In terms of fears, Lachesis is one of the main remedies for fear of snakes. However, sometimes he will not own up to this. He may say that he doesn't like snakes, or that he hates snakes, but isn't afraid of them. I've had more than a few patients say that they don't trust snakes. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The denial, the mistrust, the hatred. Other Lachesis fears include fear of being poisoned, fear of suffocation, fear of going to sleep, fear of heart disease, and claustrophobia. Okay, that's it for the mentals. Now let's discuss the physical symptomatology and some of the generals. Okay, let's begin with a couple of very important generals. Lachesis tends to be warm-blooded, but may have cold hands or feet. This reflects a tendency toward circulatory imbalance. Furthermore, Lachesis can be aggravated from and very intolerant toward hot, humid weather. Many Lachesis cases have a distinct preference for starchy foods, like pasta, rice, beans, and bread. Lachesis can also desire alcohol, can be aggravated from alcohol, and can be prone to alcoholism. Now let's look at some important Lachesis keynotes, affinities, and modalities. First of all, Lachesis is famous for its left-sided symptoms, or left-sided symptoms that extend to the right, or that switch from left to right. It's literally the opposite of lycopodium. Now we may see this left or left to right pattern in sore throats, headaches, ear infections, ovarian cysts, and even paralytic conditions. Regardless, whenever we see any symptom that moves from left to right, we think of Lachesis. Now, Lachesis is particularly prone to symptoms that affect the throat region. The Lachesis sore throat begins on the left, may extend or switch to the right, feels worse from a warm drink, better from a cold drink, and is worse upon swallowing. Strangely, the throat may feel worse from empty swallowing or swallowing liquids, but better from swallowing solid food. For Lachesis, the throat is the most vulnerable part of the body. Think of how one approaches a snake in order to catch it. If caught by the neck, it becomes powerless, unable to defend itself. The corollary here is that Lachesis is prone to a wide variety of throat symptoms and problems, such as a sensation as if there's a lump in the throat, or just a feeling that swallowing is difficult, or a tendency to gag or choke, or a feeling of constriction in the throat. Remember Ignatia with its globus hystericus? Well, Lachesis can experience this type of emotional lump in the throat too. The unique thing is that, similar to the Lachesis sore throat, all of these throat symptoms also have a tendency to feel worse on empty swallowing or swallowing liquids, but better from swallowing solids. One additional indication for Lachesis that I've seen more than a few times is in cases of asthma. Most asthma cases involve the chest or lungs, but when patients complain of difficulty breathing with a sensation as if the throat is closing or constricting, conventional doctors can sometimes misdiagnose this as asthma. Technically, we could consider this a variant of asthma, but in any event, whenever I'm faced with a case of asthma, I make sure to ask such patients where they feel the breathing problem is coming from. If they point to the throat or explain that the restriction to breathing is in the throat, then we must consider Lachesis. Now, Lachesis is also prone to a variety of circulatory problems, including a tendency to bleed easily. as in the case of nosebleeds, or heavy menses, or TIAs, or stroke. There's a fascinating phenomenon called vicarious epistaxis, which simply refers to instances when normal menstrual flow is artificially interrupted, whether by suppressive drugs or surgery or even emotional trauma, and is subsequently followed by nosebleeds. In other words, the normal menstrual flow ceases, but vicariously continues from another part of the body. When we see this unusual condition, we must consider lachesis. The hemorrhagic tendency of lachesis may also manifest as easy bruising. Any purple discoloration of the skin, whether it's bruising or a skin eruption or just purplish looking body parts, should make us think of lachesis. Additional lachesis circulatory problems include hypertension, palpitations, and heart attack. In terms of female health problems, lachesis can be indicated in a wide range of menstrual difficulties, including heavy menses, shortened or prolonged menses, early or late menses, or suppressed menses. And in most cases, we're likely to see dark purplish clotted blood rather than red blood. As previously mentioned, lachesis is indicated for left-sided ovarian cysts. Lachesis is commonly indicated for problems that develop at or around menopause. It's a great remedy for hot flashes. And finally, whether male or female, the typical lachesis case tends to have a strong sex drive. This can often be a useful clue. Hot flashes plus a diminished libido makes us think of sepia. Hot flashes plus a strong libido point to lachesis. Now, lachesis is also famous for its sleep-related issues. The typical pattern is that of a night person who stays up late and tends to sleep late in the morning. When asked, they will admit to being night persons. They come alive at night, becoming industrious, talkative, and full of ideas. Many such individuals learn to adapt their lives to this unique biorhythm. But for those required to rise early due to life's responsibilities, it can pose a serious problem. They may experience it as insomnia, unable to fall asleep until late, and then having to wake early in the morning. Some may complain that they can't fall asleep until 2, 3, or even 4 a.m. After receiving lachesis, many such patients will report that they're able to fall asleep earlier and are waking earlier with less difficulty. And this brings us to modalities, beginning with the sleep modalities. Many lachesis symptoms are aggravated around sleep. In other words, symptoms tend to flare up on falling asleep, during sleep, on waking at night, or after waking in the morning. For example, many lachesis patients complain of headaches that begin on waking in the morning. Another problem that occurs on falling to or waking from sleep is apnea. In cases of sleep apnea where the breathing difficulty is associated with a sensation of throat constriction, then lachesis should be high on the list of remedy choices. Okay, so in addition to aggravation around sleep, other lachesis modalities include aggravation from hot weather, especially hot, humid weather. There may be a seasonal aggravation during fall and spring. Lachesis conditions are aggravated from suppressed discharges and have a corresponding amelioration from free discharges, whether that's a discharge of blood or mucus or even emotion. Think about the mental and physical parallels here. Psychologically speaking, lachesis denies certain emotional issues, but ultimately needs to express herself. On a physical level, she feels worse before the menses, but then feels better once it begins to flow. Sometimes we see an aggravation of symptoms while lying on the left side. And finally, there may be an aggravation from slight pressure or slight touch, but a paradoxical amelioration from hard pressure. Note the similarity between this pressure sensitivity and the previously mentioned aggravation from empty swallowing or swallowing liquids and amelioration from swallowing solid food. In terms of remedy relationships, Lachesis is famously complementary to Lycopodium, and Hyoscyamus can be easily confused with Lachesis because of the psychological similarities. Both are jealous, loquacious, and indicated in cases of unresolved grief. But Hyoscyamus tends to be more mentally disorganized, while the mind of Lachesis is usually very sharp indeed. It's also important to compare sepia to Lachesis, because both have so many hormonally related dysfunctions in common. Now let's summarize Lachesis with a short list of its most important features. We have talkativeness, jealousy, mistrust, left-sided symptoms that move to the right, aggravation from hot, humid weather, late-night persons who want to sleep late in the morning, aggravation from sleep, desire for starchy foods, and an affinity for the throat, the heart and circulatory system, the female organs, and a tendency towards sleep disorders. Okay, that's it for Lachesis. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, I ask that you share this with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe, and please tune in again to the next episode of All Things Homeopathy. May the vital force be with you.